Hi, ladies and gentlemen. We are privileged and honored to be here with Member of European Parliament, Christine Anderson. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So you're here in Canada on the What Would Christine Anderson Do tour. When the Freedom Convoy started, it electrified Canada. The protesters, along with the truckers, were protesting the unconstitutional vaccine mandates, but it was as much a celebration to reclaim our constitutional rights and freedoms, which were being trampled. Somehow it exploded around the world into convoys, and then that light beamed right into you, and it was reflected in some powerful speeches that you gave.
A prime minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House.
Your famous line, of course, that everybody heard around the world, that just made Canadians' hearts beat so much louder.
Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
It was a fantastic moment for all of us because it confirmed and affirmed to the world that we are being heard, that other people are going through this as well, and it was so incredible. What compelled you to come to Canada?
Well, as you stated very accurately, that once the Freedom Convoy started here in Canada, that was the hope that people needed, and finally someone did something and stood up, and that made it for millions of people possible to realize we are not alone in this, and I'm not isolated with my opinion on that. And as you said, that this spark of hope, it traveled all around the globe, and that is what the people needed. And I was beside myself once I heard about it, and I watched so many footage, video clips, and all of this just to kind of suck it in. And that's what the people needed, and that's what the Canadian truckers did. And I jumped right on that to give as much support as possible. And I wanted to meet the people who made this happen. Because I consider the Freedom Convoy that it was as big a symbol and had as much a magnitude on waking people up and on getting change as, let's say, the Solidarność did in the 80s in Poland, which ultimately led to the collapse of the Eastern Warsaw Bloc. So that's actually what went through my mind. And I really wanted to meet the people that were so brave and had obviously understood what is to be done when your government disenfranchise you and tramples on fundamental rights. You stand up and you do something.
Yeah, and I mean, I know from the people that were at some of the events here already, so many tears of gratitude have been shed for what you've done to help shine a light for freedom, for not, again, just for the truckers in Canada, but this is a global phenomenon. We are seeing unprecedented implementations of global policies that are singular in narrative, like the COVID pandemic, which amounted to now, with scientific evidence, we know that the infection fatality rate is that of a flu. We saw pandemic policies that we have never seen before. They threw out all the existing ones,
yes,
lockstep around the world. We saw the vaccine rollout, coerced experimental vaccination, forced their jobs, their livelihoods. We know the whole story. And now we're seeing this continuation of a lockstep implementation of policies around the world again. We have the digital IDs coming. We have digital cash. The G7 talked about that. The vaccine passport will be global, declared at the G20. Now we also have the smart cities rolling out. We have the IHR being amended soon by the World Health Organization that will give them global authoritarian power to dictate all pandemic policies, which will, of course, now dealing with health, it will also include climate change, anxiety, and anything to do with climate change. What do you see as happening right now in terms of how these policies are being spread? What's the force behind this, and what is your biggest fear?
Well, I've been saying it saw it from the very beginning, if you will. Things didn't add up, so something must be wrong with this whole COVID pandemic. It just did not add up. COVID was really just a test balloon, infringing on fundamental rights, which are unprecedented in Western democracies. What we've seen, unprecedented harshness and pushing people down, taking their rights away, and the determination with which the governments enforced these restrictions, unprecedented in Western democracies. There has been a digital green certificate, has been the COVID pass has been introduced, unprecedented, that you would within your own country have to show, something to be allowed to go somewhere. And so, yeah, really, COVID has been a test balloon. They were trying to see how far they could go. And as we now know, they could have gone, or they could go quite far, which they have done. And now we're seeing it. There is talk about EU ID or digital identity globally. There is the climate madness now being played out. They're talking about climate lockdown. So, and what I've been saying, the people really need to connect the dots to see where this is going. And what I can tell you is look at to China, how things are handled over there, and that's how that's where we will be going next. And the people just need to understand this, and they need to be really afraid of this. And my biggest fear actually is that the people realize too late, and they will realize at a point where there is nothing else to be done, because considering the technological means of today, once we are in a fully blown totalitarian regime, we're not talking about 40 years of GDR or 70 years of Soviet Union. We're talking about a very, very long time. And my biggest fear is there is nothing that we are going to be able to do about it anymore once we get to that point.
Yeah, I think you raise a great point. When I left Ottawa, when the convoy was over, the violence had passed, I took an Uber ride with an Iranian taxi driver, and he said that, what he saw here was incredibly harsh, he said, but it was different from what he saw in Iran, because he said in Iran, at least the people there knew that their government was oppressive. They knew that their government was corrupt. Yes. He said, what's worse is here is people think they're free when they're not.
Yes.
And this is a scary proposition.
It is. And I always, it's actually quite scary. And we in the Western democracies, we are in essence spoiled brats. We just think freedom, democracy, and a rule of law, just fell out of the blue sky on one fine day, and boom, there it was. And it's always going to be there, obviously. So the people no longer really see the need that freedom, democracy, and a rule of law have to be defended on an everyday basis, because they've forgotten that it was wrestled from the former elites, and our fathers and forefathers literally spilled blood to wrestle it from the elites to make sure that their kids would get to live in a free world. And once you forget that, once you no longer appreciate something because you take it for granted, that is the time when you actually will lose it.
To avoid the scenario where this totalitarian biometric surveillance system is employed, where we have a social credit system where you can't drive, you can't travel, go to maybe university or whatnot without having your vaccine ID and everything else that goes along with the social credit system score. How do we avoid that? How do we get accountability for a world where we already see things are so corrupt? We see Albert Bourla, the Pfizer CEO, say to the European Commission, I'm not going to show up for this Pfizer commission here. He just blows that off. No regular citizen can sit there and throw off a parliamentary commission. How do we get the Ursula von der Leyen's to be responsible for their actions when she's having pre-contract talks with Bourla over text messages on a government phone, and then all of a sudden when they say, can we see these text messages, she somehow lost them? What is the step that everyone can take?
Well, first of all, stop complying. Because if you really think you could evade government oppression by compliance, it's not going to work. Because silence and compliance enable tyrants. It's as simple as that. So if we had just said no, and if a lot of people had just said no, then none of this would have been able to happen. They would not have been able to pull this off. So, and also people need to go back to the basics of democracy. What does democracy mean? Democracy means that the elected representative, that the elected government, you are their employer, and they have to do what you tell them to do. It's not the other way around, that they like drop down and implement measures, and then on top of it, discredit you and stigmatize you if you don't like this. This is not how this is supposed to work. And yes, the politicians have to answer to the people. And if the politicians refuse to do that, then don't vote for them anymore. Just don't. Get on your government's back. Be in their faces. Let them know you will not stand for this. You will not put up with this. And just get the democratic processes back to a functioning kind of mechanism where you will actually be able to vote someone out of office if he does not do what you tell him to do.
And I heard your speech yesterday, very powerful. You said that people need to actually get involved.
Yes.
Get into your school councils, get into running for politics within your own districts. We're going to conclude this interview, but I want to thank you for everything that you're doing, for speaking on behalf of everybody that cherishes and values freedom around the globe, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of nationality. This is freedom is something that's fundamental to all of us. So thank you again for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me.
As our collective individual rights and freedoms continue being attacked, Bright Light News is bringing you the courageous voices of change. But we need your help. Please join our supporters and donate today at brightlightnews.com or send an e-transfer to gord@brightlightnews.com. And thanks for watching.